let's start with some getting your hands ready. So who's been to all 10 ADCs? There's surely a few, me, scattering of the faithful. Who's been to all the ones and India and Tokyo and San Francisco? Anyone? Probably not, nobody. Heather, really, you've been to all of them? Oh, okay, no one's got the whole collection. Okay, who here has been a professional audio developer since 2015? That's a pretty healthy show of hands. So who's a professional audio developer now? Bigger set of people. Good. Keep your hand up if you think in 10 years' time you'll still be a professional audio developer. Yeah, okay, you have some pretty optimism going on there. That's good. Keep your hand up if you think in 10 years any of us will be a professional audio developer. Okay, well, who knows? Confucius said, study the past if you would define the future. I mean, okay, fine, but in 500 BC, there was less past to study, and things changed quite slowly. So he also failed to mention that the future can suddenly take some really surprising directions when technology changes the things that are possible. And I think, amongst even the techie nerds like us, none of us were expecting another big paradigm shift right now, not for a while, especially not right under our noses. But like after about 50 years of being completely rubbish, AI suddenly sort of went, hey, and got its act together. And now we're all sort of, there's a sense that everyone's flapping around, sort of wondering what happens next. Another ancient Chinese proverb maker who didn't do quite so well at getting people to remember his name said, may you live in interesting times. And it's a very interesting time to be working in technology, and also the 10th year of ADC. So I kind of wanted to do a talk about like what's going on generally in audio dev, where we've come from. I think part of wanting to do that is that I feel personally quite uncertain about everything at the moment, and I get that sense from a lot of the people I know as well. And it feels like a good time to take some perspective on things. Before I start whinging on about the state of the world, I will start with a few nice things about ADC. And I'm going to just jump around between lots of topics. I couldn't find a big narrative arc for this talk, but it felt like a good time to just voice a lot of the things that are on people's minds at the moment, get some perspective on what we're all doing, how we're all thinking about the way things are moving. So ADC, like the reason we're all here today goes back to 2015 and the first Juice Summit, because it wasn't ADC then. And I like to think this is the kind of the audio dev equivalent of the first legendary Sex Pistols gig. So hands up, people who were there. Good. And who was at the Sex Pistols first gig? Go on, let's be no. So we had about 100 people in a room in East London, which, for the record, is 5 times more than the Sex Pistols. It was not as slick a conference as we get now at ADC, but it was a lot of fun. We had Juice t-shirts. My beard was still brown. I was going to do an origin story here for the conference, but it's not been exactly clear who said the thing first that we should do a conference. The Juice team at the time was me, Timur, Fabian, and JB, and the 3 of those guys came from more academic backgrounds than me. They were more conference people. So somehow out of all this, the idea bubbled up, hey, we should have a conference. And sort of JB was definitely the person who sort of ran with the idea and really pushed it to happen. I was looking for a Juice Summit logo to put in my slides, but all I could find on the internet was this, which is not right, but that is also why it's a good idea that we immediately change the name the next year to ADC. So 2016 was the one we had, we sort of grew up. We had it at Goldsmiths, I think. Was it Goldsmiths? I had a newborn baby that year, and my memory is even hazier than usual. But this is when the conference really sort of took form. I mean, one of the great things about this industry, and good and bad things about this industry, is it's a really small world. And ADC quickly became this place where a lot of us kind of made like-minded friends. And, in many cases, these are sort of friends that we see once a year. And But I think we've got to the point where over the years we've got enough momentum that I think even if we stopped having talks or anything, people would still want to come together once a year and just meet all these people again because we catch up, and it's kind of like having a big extended family Christmas. Most of the ADCs were at Code Node in London, which is a basement venue for those of you who've not been there, fully shielded from anything like daylight and air. We had a quick change of venue one year when Code Node got involved in some kind of sketchy cryptocurrency investment, and they went very suddenly bankrupt like a couple of weeks before ADC. So we had a quick, Sophie and the team sort of pulled out something out the bag very quickly, and we managed to get through that. I think it was only COVID that really stopped the fun in 2020, and that was the online-only year. 2024, we've ended up here in Bristol, which is working out pretty well. One of the struggles of ADC was always that finding a pub afterwards that could take 100 random people and be open late was always a struggle. So being here has actually helped a lot with that. We have rivals. I mean, obviously, in the NAM show is where the big money gets spent and the big deals happen. And your big brain mathematicians, they all prefer DAFX because they go and give these academic talks that just go straight over my head. Superbooth is where you go if you just want to look cool, you want to be seen. But it's no good having all these big deals and great DSP ideas and this amazing cool brand, because you've got to have some nerds to actually build these products and make them work properly. And that's always been kind of our niche at ADC. We're the folk who do the dirty work and actually build the products and make it work. While I was finding logos for the slides, public service announcement, we're not the only one apparently. So if you meet anyone wandering around who's asking you about antibody drug conjugates, you might want to sort of say, maybe they clicked the wrong link. So, okay, we've had fun 10 years learning all the tricks of the trade. So let's get a bit of perspective on where everything is, what's happened. From this point in the talk, I mean, most of the things I'll say will be a kind of mashup of my opinions, the opinions of people I've talked to in the industry and at the pub. I'm not going to name check everyone because who gave any of these opinions, because I've mostly forgotten who said what. And it's all, caveat, it's all subjective, randomly selected. But, if this talk does nothing else, it will hopefully just trigger a bit of, bar conversations later. Okay, the last decade. What a time to be alive. If the boomers who lived through the 1960s, they saw the moon landings, the birth of modern computing, the civil rights movement. They could afford to buy a house, and they could retire before the age of 80, but they didn't have NFTs, or disposable vapes, or tariffs. I mean, I was trying to think of some positive things to put in, but we did finally get electric cars, proper ones, and Elon Musk. So, going to kick off with, okay, for the more nerdy side of the tech for the last decade, I'm going to present the once only, very subjective Jules Awards for audio tech stuff that sort of happened. So, we're going to start off with the Good Riddance Award for crap that the world is glad to see the back of. There were lots of contenders for this. Honorable mentions will go to some runners-up. So we got rid of 32-bit CPUs. Goodbye. We got rid of RTAS. Windows Vista, that still existed. The dongles, they're still hanging around, but they're on the way out. Direct Sound, who remembers that? God, that was a bit of my life I'll never get back. VST2, I mean, conversations like some people miss VST2. It was bad, but it was simple. But the prize goes to Pixels. For the benefit of our younger audience, when you're looking at a TikTok, the pictures are actually made of little tiny colored dots. You wouldn't believe it, would you? But in 2015, pixels were still big enough that people could see them. And some people really cared about them. And they counted them. And they would create plug-in user interfaces based on pixels. And I did lots of ADC talks where I said, pixels are shrinking. They're going to go away. You need to make your interfaces rescale to any size. But for a lot of those years, I felt like I was screaming into a bucket. And people were still making these unreadable fixed size graphics in Photoshop like it was the 90s. And then other people banged on and on about font anti-aliasing. Why are my fonts blurry? Well, like I told you at the time, it's because the pixels are big. But now they're not. They've gone, they've shrunk, they've gone. Good riddance, because screens look lovely and nobody whinges about their blurry fonts anymore. But in a way, I grew up with 8-bit computers and big pixels, so I kind of miss them in a nostalgic way, but we're moving on. So the award for seemingly obvious stuff that should have happened sooner. We can now plug USB cables in without being wrong. 20 years we had to wait for that. The hipsters were already just about using Git and GitHub in 2015, but that became such a no-brainer that it's hard to believe we ever didn't have Git. I'm old enough just about to remember pre-Git source control, and it was a miserable time. We all take Slack and messaging systems for granted now, but that was still new and trendy in 2015. I remember the hipsters at Rowley. That was where they talked about what coffee to get. And anyone old enough to remember Internet Explorer 6, that had only just officially died in 2015. And in JavaScript land, standards, the ES6, grown-up JavaScript, really only just appeared in that year. But not everything has been positive. So this is the Essential but Horrible Award for things we use every day but hate. There is only one. I'm not even going to do runners-up for this one. This doesn't get runners-up. CMake was not very common in 2015, but it went on to utterly infect the C++ world. I had to go with the producer. That was before 2015, in fact. But, I lost that battle. All the other good build systems lost their battle. Everyone uses CMake now. It does everything you need, but good Lord, it does it in a horrible way. I can't even get past the stupidness of that file name. So I'm not even going to dwell on this one. I'm going to move on. So, okay, finally, the most cringeworthy phrase of the decade award. So hands up in shame, please, if your company has ever used this phrase. Now, last time I checked, music was one of the few things that isn't currently in danger of becoming an authoritarian regime. You're trying to convince your investor that this new product will appeal to people who are both rich and too lazy to learn an instrument. But, there are more important things out there to democratize. Start with Russia or America. Honestly, bit of politics. Does playing music really need to be dumbed down? I play guitar. Part of the reason I play guitar is because it's difficult. Would the world be better if all guitars had a Stairway to Heaven button? Please don't anybody build that. Okay, enough silliness. Let's look at some of the areas where the industry's changed. I'm going to go through a bunch of areas. It was very hard to think of a sort criteria, so I'm going to start with the most boring things and work my way up. So we've got to start with MIDI. MIDI has to be boring to do its job. It's important, but dull. However, we were blessed this decade. We did see a MIDI release, which is a rare thing. It's like waiting for Halley's Comet to come around. So, and I worked out our grandkids can look forward to some welcoming MIDI 3 in about 2065. So that'll be nice for them. MIDI 2 seems fine. It does the stuff that wasn't in MIDI 1. It's fine. It's quite easy to predict the next 10 years of MIDI. Some MIDI 2 devices will come out. Okay. Some of the other least eventful things in audio have been in the forms of what we used to code with. C++ still rules the roost. The big news of the decade in the wider programming community was Rust, which kind of surprisingly has just still not made it in audio. I'm surprised by that. It's a really well-suited language for that, but it's just not quite taken off. I think it's just because we move pretty slowly as an industry. And Juice is still king of the frameworks. My gut feeling, though, is that the average code quality is a lot better than 2015. I'd like to think that it's all these ADC talks by Fabian, Timmer, and Dave that have made that happen. But like even beginners seem to have a much more professional approach to coding than back in the wild west of the early 2000s. Back in like 2015, things like CI servers and and automated testing were really only just getting to be popular. But now it's just everybody does that. In DSP, I think if there were any earth-shattering discoveries in DSP, I must have missed them. But that's okay. DSP is largely a solved problem. No one's expecting another better Fourier transform to be invented. And I think there's also been, over the decade, a definite trend for the really mathematically minded people to be tempted over to the dark side of machine learning, which is the same kind of mathematical problems, but much better paid. Plugins are also quite dull, and there haven't been any huge changes in the world of plugins. Steinberg finally managed to stamp out the last of the VST2 resistance, which is probably for the best, really. But amazingly, in researching this, I found out VST3 itself is already 17 years old. So these things are long-term stuff. I mean, the biggest and certainly the best thing in plugin world, I think, has been that Clap appeared. I mean, Clap is technically great, and it does actually have momentum. It's picking up, but it still has such a long way to go before being mainstream. So please do support that if you can. Will Clap win the plugin format war? And in 2035, is every plugin going to be a Clap plugin? I'd like to think that, but I'm not going to place any bets on it. Oh, and the one other thing is that I think plugin val and some of the things have really increased quality on plugins. I think that's definitely been a trend over the decade. Probably just better coding, but also using better tools to test. And people putting plugin val in their CI systems has really made a big difference. So we're seeing less crashes. I mean, maybe another factor in plugins being better over the decade is that I stopped working on Juice in about 2019. So it's probably been a lot less buggy since that. What has surprisingly failed to happen in the world of plugins, though, is that we've not really had a web plugin format emerge. I mean, web audio is nice and stable. Even web MIDI is pretty well supported. WASM is not as good as native code, but it's okay. You can do some pretty good performance out of it. If the web door makers are to be believed, then there should be tens of millions of people using web doors out there. So where's the web plugin market? A few people have had a go. But probably the front runner at the moment is this thing, web audio modules. It's not a household name. I mean, who here knows about web audio modules? Like a dozen hands. And there's almost no content for it. There's no real proper hosts that use it. And that's currently the best we've got for an audio web format. Will this change? I mean, who here is actively looking into doing some kind of web-based plugin in the coming years? Actually, not many. I thought that'd be more hands. There's a few. Okay. But then the question is, do we need more plugins? The numbers here could be completely dodgy. This is like, I used Google Gemini research to do this, but the trend feels kind of right. Certainly over the last 10 years, we've more than doubled the number of plugins out there. There are so many plugins. We're drowning in plugins. We can probably stop making plugins if we had to, and people would be just fine. Are people buying more plugins? Don't know. Couldn't really figure that one out. Will the line keep on rising? I mean, it is easier than ever now to make a plugin. Is this a good thing? I have no answers for this bit. Discuss in the bar later. Doors. The biggest thing that came up when I asked people about their feelings about doors is that they're coming with more and more batches included these days. There are more plugins included. We've already got our 20,000 plugins out there to choose from. But if you buy one of the big doors, it's going to come with a bundle that lets you make pretty much any kind of music you're going to need to do, really. So this is all bad news if you're building a plugin and trying to get it noticed. Are the DAWs going to keep on this trend of just adding more and more stuff until they've eaten everybody else's lunch? I don't know. I mean, how many more core features can the DAWs add? They already do everything you need. An easy way for them to keep adding value is to bundle more instruments and effects. So it's probably going to keep going that way. But if the native DAWs are eating all the plugin makers' lunches, are the web DAWs going to come along and eat all of the native DAWs' lunch? I mean, I don't really understand the numbers on web DAWs. BandLab are the biggest, and they claim 60 million users. And the others claim numbers in the millions. Is that true? That's the population of Britain. That's more than all the native DAWs combined. Are that many people really making songs in their browser? I don't think we're going to see the end of native audio software in the next 10 years, but we will almost certainly see more web software appearing. I mean, my bet's on kind of hybrid, maybe web UIs, but more native processing for the performance side. People do love to collect things, don't they? I mean, I'm lucky not to have the gene that makes some people get addicted to spending thousands of pounds on modular gear. But that has been an audio success story over the last decade. Hands up modular gear collectors? Really? Is that surely more should admit that? I'm predicting next 10 years. Predicting next 10 years of modular gear is really easy because it's just the same. AI isn't going to disrupt this lot. It's just more flashing lights and more wires. Another thing that kind of flew towards us and then spun around our heads and whizzed off behind us over the last decade has been spatial audio. This was enjoying the role of being like the massively overhyped thing for a while, and then AI came along and beat it. We've definitely passed peak spatial audio, but according to my sources, it's not gone away. It's just grown up and become mainstream and normal, and it's now living a quiet life in cinema and live sound and given up its wild years. I think if you'd asked me in 2015 whether everyone now would be using more audio over IP by 2025, I'd probably said, well, yeah, that would make sense. As a sort of software person, it's always seemed like me as a no-brainer that we could replace a lot of these analog cables with cheap Ethernet and commodity network cards. I mean, in the high-end pro setups, obviously, there's much more of that's happened over the decade because it's great for really large channel counts. But it's still struggling to take off below that in the low end of the market. Maybe because Dante's expensive for manufacturers. But we've got new open protocols now like Ravenna and AES that hopefully everything's going to start moving a bit more in that direction. In studios and live sound, I mean, clearly, as I'm sure we're all aware, like music streaming has made a huge shift in the economics of the music industry. And live performance has sort of become where artists make more of their income than ever in the past. So live sound is definitely the healthiest part of the music tech industry right now. I did a bit of research into studios. Studios are actually doing okay. There's declined, the studio world, but it seems to be quite steady. I mean, sure, a simple home studio is now good enough to record almost anything, but big studios have always been about more than just the gear. They're the environment, the expertise, the vibe, a place to actually get a band together. And but what about home recording? So it seems pretty safe to predict that in 10 years, the amount of gear you need for a decent home studio will have shrunk even further. I mean, I would be amazed if in 2035 you can't just get your laptop, record the vocals into its built-in mic with the washing machine running in the background, and then run some free machine learning algorithm to make it sound like it was recorded in Abbey Road Studio 2 on a particular mic. I mean, this stuff will never be perfect, but it'll probably be good enough. And this is going to take more chunks out of the audio gear market. I mean, my feeling is that home recording is probably going to split into two factions. There'll be people with just a laptop, maybe a MIDI controller keyboard, and then the others who have all the gear and the racks and the analog collectible vintage mics and synths and things. So yeah, and then yeah, industry sentiment. I was kind of to get a feel for how everyone's feeling at the moment. I won't ask you to put your hand up if your company's having a hard time at the moment, but for a while it's been like when I ask people how it's going, it tends to get a bit of a groan. This wasn't the case back in 2020, 21, when we had the COVID boom and all those housebound people spent their furlough money on music gear. Lots of the big audio companies back then started suddenly raking it in. I mean, it should have been quite obvious at the time that this was a short-term effect, but some long-term decisions were made on the assumption that this was just the start of a massive, never-ending boom in home audio. And then in the middle of that, we had the semiconductor crisis, and that factory in Japan that made a large chunk of the world's audio converter chips burn down in 2021. And many in this people here will have been burned by that one. My company, Prism, we lost a year to that. And now we have the joy of random tariffs with the USA. So things, there's a lot of headwinds. And a lot of that stuff was just bad luck. But then there were two big rants that came up when I asked people for things I should talk about in this talk. The first one is private equity. During the COVID boom, some companies suddenly found their surging revenue made them very attractive to investors. And some of them picked this very good moment to cash out to private equity investors who wanted a piece of this definitely not just temporary boom in music gear. So after COVID, when things kind of obviously returned to normal, we were left with some very rich people and some very overvalued companies that were now struggling to fulfill the promises they'd made to their new owners. The other phrase that came up a lot from multiple people was race to the bottom. There's a feeling that we've got to a stage where we're churning out more products than the market can support. I mean, the whole democratizing music mindset has maybe pushed companies to overestimate just how many more users you can get by making things cheaper and simpler. And those cheaper, simpler apps make it harder to justify the expensive premium tools that have always been the thing that supported the pro end of audio, of music tech. So Alan Kay, one of the great inventors in the field of computing, said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Easy for you to say, Alan Kay. Back in the 1960s, when there were loads of really easy computing inventions just waiting to be picked from those low-hanging branches. Oh, I think I'll invent the mouse. I think I'll put a box on the screen and call it a window. But what's left for us to create now? It's all been done. Well, it is easy now because you don't have to invent anything anymore. You can just ask ChatGPT to create the future for you. Okay, I'm going to tackle AI now. There are two completely different sides to AI that are interesting to this audience. There's AI that processes sound, maybe creates sounds, and that benefits our end users. And then there's AI for coding and language tasks, mainly used for us to build stuff. So I'm going to start with, we'll talk about AI generation, audio generation. Over the years at ADC, we've had plenty of machine learning audio demos. Like going way back, there have always been a few. And without wanting to be rude, they were always not that impressive. Often it was quite academic research. And generally we'd come out going, oh, cute idea, nice demo, shame it doesn't sound good enough for a real product. This is never really my area. So I think me and a lot of other people assumed it was always going to stay like that and never really go anywhere fast. But that turned out to be really wrong. Probably the most impactful thing that AI has achieved in this time has been stem separation. And that's been great. That's the nice thing about that as well, is that we had no other way to do that before. And it's also become basically free, integrated into all the doors, and we sort of take that for granted now. There's also been a lot of work on automated mixing and mastering. Some companies have built very accurate simulations of analog hardware, mostly guitar pedals, isn't it? just in case we don't have quite enough guitar distortion effects. There's been some really cool work on the audio restoration side of things. Some really cool uses of machine learning to clean up old recordings and restore things. Lots of interesting work going on there at the moment. But I was going to have, I put in a slide here to have a rant about AI-generated songs and slop. The Sunos, the Udios, but then I thought, I don't want to read the room wrong here. So I've been going around for the last couple of days asking people at the conference, like, should I be ranting about this? Am I overlooking? Am I missing a point? Is this actually good in some way? No, apparently. Like, yeah. I mean, honestly, even if we ignore the copyright infringement stuff, I mean, does the world really need some random new cheap music so badly that the musicians are now a bottleneck and we need to kind of replace them? I mean, the pitch in favor of this stuff seems to be the usual democratizing music stuff, letting non-musicians make music. But, making music is not the same as asking for some music. These are very different things. There's a spectrum. One end you have to learn and practice and you make music. The other end is just like playing songs on Spotify. Prompting is somewhere in there. I mean, there's probably a healthy middle ground somewhere, but honestly, I couldn't, nobody gave me any answer that I could put in here to justify this stuff. It feels like it's just, even the least, even the simplest users of this is chipping away a little bit at musicians' income. But I'm going to take the ranting down a notch here, and we'll move on to the other type of AI, LLMs and the coding assistants. And this is something I definitely did not see coming until it came out of nowhere last year. Google were nice enough to name one after me. The tagline they gave it sounds uncannily like the basis for my whole career. It didn't get very good reviews, though. And out of this has come the vibe coding. Vibe coding was just selected last week as Collins Dictionary's Word of the Year 2025. Whoa. Now, anyone who knows what I've done probably thinks I'm going to stand up here and be the ultimate anti-AI coding person. I don't need an AI coding assistant. I've spent 40 long years learning to do this myself. Thanks very much. I don't need your help. And I've also spent most of my career coming here banging on about handcrafting perfect code, making it more human readable. I've always said, I don't use automatic code formatters because they lose some of the human touch. And, I've always said these things are really, really important. So I kind of thought when these things came out that I would absolutely despise AI coding. But a friend of mine persuaded me to give it a proper go. And honestly, over the last 6 months, it's totally transformed everything I work on and how I see coding as a whole. But I do still really hate that term, vibe coding. Chatting about it to lots of my veteran coder mates, I think the consensus is about how to approach these things is roughly this. If you don't need an AI coder, they can be really, really useful. If you do need one, they're really dangerous. It's also good advice for alcohol, drugs, modular synthesizers. If you know what you're doing, and you can tell the LLM exactly what to do and what not to do, you can spot them doing stupid things, making poor choices, and tell them what to do instead. They can be really, really powerful. I've honestly, the last 6 months or so, I've done almost all my coding via an abusive relationship with Claude. And I can get things done really, really fast. I mean, I had a worry that one day when the machine intelligences take over, they're going to look back at my Claude logs and the things I've said to it, and I'm going to be first up against the wall for thought crimes against AI. But And my one kind of, I was trying to sum up some piece of advice to give people about like how to approach these things. And I think the best I can do is, it's no good thinking that you can talk to them in English. You have to speak to them in senior programmer, which is a bit like English, but patronizing. So, to use these things well, you have to be a good programmer. You have to have lots of experience. If you're not, and you're trying to learn, it's really hard to learn from what they write, because often they'll write something that works, that does what you ask them to do, but it's stupid. And if you don't know that, you're going to read that and go, oh, that's how you do things. So the fact that this stuff exists now is really going to create a bit of a dilemma for how new programmers learn. It's a little bit like when calculators came out in the 70s and all the teachers panicked that kids would no longer learn to do mental arithmetic. But it's also different, because if you type a sum into a calculator, you don't have to check it's correct. With these things, you can't trust them not to generate slop. But they're so tempting, and especially if you're a learner. I don't know, people will come to cope with this. People will still learn to program, but it's going to be dramatically different. And I don't think anyone at the moment really knows how this is going to emerge and what's going to change in the way people approach programming. There's also a really nasty effect that they're going to have on software innovation. The models that we use have been trained on years of data, so they're best at things that are common, and they prefer to do things they're good at, that they've been trained on a lot. So if you ask an AI to build you a website, it'll probably use React, unless you tell it otherwise. So if you don't know what to use, it'll just use React for you. If you ask it to build you an audio plugin, it'll use Juice, so good for Juice. But this is a kind of self-reinforcing network effect. Because AIs are now going to be producing more React sites, more Juice plugins, these are going to go into they're going to be out on the web, they're going to go into the next training set, and these models are going to be reinforced for using them again and again. Not because they're good, Juice is good, obviously, but because they're common, and because they know them best. And this is going to make it increasingly hard to break through with new ideas and technologies, because to get into the training set and be picked as something that these AIs are going to use, and to be recommended when the programmer says, what should I use for this thing I'm building? I don't know. Rather than going to search on the web, they'll just ask their AI. To be in the set of data that makes that decision is made on, you kind of need an army of manual programmers to choose it themselves as humans and create lots of content for that, which gets trained. But there are going to be fewer and fewer manual developers doing that. So are we all going to lose our jobs? It's funny, I started writing this talk a couple of months ago, and we were in peak AI hype bubble. I think even in that tiny short time, the hysterical hype has died down quite a lot. A couple of months ago, it was all going to be that all software programmers would disappear because all software will be vibe coded by a marketing executive. I think people have calmed down a bit now, and that's worn off. And the economics of the current investments in AI infrastructure is just so ridiculous. That will definitely implode in a huge mess at some point soon. But that's actually a good thing, because it's a bubble where things are being created, ideas are being created. And it's a bubble where when it bursts, there's actually going to be a bunch of ideas come raining down, and some good ones will remain, and they'll be taken up. And I imagine AI will become a normal, boring tool, and everyone will just get on with it. Coding agents will replace some coding jobs, probably, but I don't think it's going to be carnage, and they'll probably create new ones that we can't imagine yet. For me, I'm just very glad that I'm never going to have to write a line of CMake myself ever again in my career. Okay. I also asked my peers, what should people be focusing on if they want to make it in audio dev now? Because anyone who's here for the first time, starting your audio development career, you're going to be saying, well, what should I be doing? I don't know. What should I be learning now? I don't know. Most of my peers said, I don't know. A couple of years ago, this would have been easy. And the standard career advice we always used to give people at ADC is, get really good at C++, learn some DSP, learn some GUI things, all your essential tools, your basics, publish some open source, use spaces, not tabs. Just good, basic, down-to-earth, solid career advice. It's probably still good advice. But I thought because AI, I don't ask an AI for its advice because nobody thinks for themselves anymore. So see what the AI says to this question. I tried a few. Claude seemed to be the best. It's not actually that different from our human advice, apart from maybe the one bit, because they're just obsessed with Python. Ignore the Python. Don't do Python. Are we doomed? Well, probably. Hopefully not before we've had a chance for a beer this evening. I'm getting to the end. I'm not going to keep you from that for much longer. I will leave you with this one. The AIs, they might be able to steal our jobs and ruin the internet, but do they have a sense of humor? So the eternal question, how many audio programmers does it take to change a light bulb? ChatGPT. Classic answer, that's a hardware problem. Sunglasses emoji, bit of insecurity there. Is it, oh, did they know it's a joke? Oh, like me. Gemini, one, they just need to figure out which plugin to use and then keep tweaking the frequency response until the room is bright enough. It's a bit long-winded. It's got the brightness thing, I see where it's going. It's got, okay, relevant emoji, 6 out of 10. Grok's answer makes very little sense. But to be fair, if you think that it's been trained on far-right conspiracy theories mainly, that's not entirely surprising. No emoji for you, libtards. ZAI, none. They just use a compressor to make the old one louder. 2 emojis. Snappy, not bad. DeepSeek. The bulb is fine. You're just clipping. Turn down the sun. I think it's created a new form of haiku for this joke. There are so many layers to this answer that I just can't even, I'm not even gonna go into it. And then Claude. I mean, it's probably a better answer than the others would give, but I'm not, I'm the pro tier. So anyway, I have reached my 5-hour limit and run out of tokens. I know a lot of this talk's been kind of pessimistic. It does feel like the industry is a bit battered at the moment, but kind of the people who do this stuff are almost, by definition, a kind of self-selecting bunch of creative and passionate people, as well as failed musicians. And I'm sure great things will emerge from us. And I hope we'll hopefully see you all back here to talk about all those great things for at least the next 10 years. So maybe much longer. Okay. Thank you very much.